They didn't realize what they had. That's the truth that stings, isn't it? You gave your love wholeheartedly, unfiltered, unguarded, and unafraid. You didn't come with conditions or a backup plan. You simply loved. And in a world where so many people hold back, where hearts come half shut, you gave yours wide open. But instead of being cherished, your love was treated like it was disposable. They didn't just take it for granted. They made you feel like your love was a burden, and that kind of pain of watching your efforts, your loyalty, your softness be undervalued, it changes you. But here's the part they'll never see coming. It didn't break you. It woke you up, because there's a fire that gets lit inside you when you've been underestimated. When someone mishandles your love, they don't just lose access to it. They ignite a transformation. You start to rebuild. And this time, you rebuild differently, wiser, stronger, clearer. You rise, not in spite of the hurt, but because of it. Let them watch now. Let them stand back and witness what they lost, because your glow-up isn't just about revenge or proving a point. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about no longer shrinking to fit into spaces where your heart was too big for small minds. It's about becoming the version of yourself that you were always meant to be, before the pain taught you how to stop begging to be seen. You loved with sincerity, and they mistook it for weakness. They mistook your kindness for naivety, your loyalty for convenience, your availability for desperation. But love isn't weakness. It's the most courageous act a person can offer in a world that's grown cold. You weren't too much. You just offered your warmth to someone stuck in their winter. You brought color into a black and white world, and they couldn't see it, but now they will. Not through explanations, not through confrontation, but through your transformation. You rise by no longer chasing validation. You rise by knowing your worth without needing them to confirm it. You rise when you realize that love given freely isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to honor. And just because they failed to appreciate it doesn't mean it lost its value. Their inability to love you deeply doesn't make you unlovable. It just means they weren't equipped to meet someone like you. And that's not your burden to carry anymore. So this isn't about bitterness. It's about clarity. You rise not to hurt them, but to heal you. Because every time you begged to be understood, every time you lowered your standards to keep someone close, every time you ignored your intuition just to avoid being alone, you were slowly moving away from yourself. Now you come home, now you say, I choose me, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. You rise by walking away from cycles that drained you, from conversations that made you question your worth, from relationships that felt more like negotiations than connection. And in that distance, in that silence, in that bold move, you find your power. You find the woman or man within you who never needed to be fixed, only freed. The truth is, some people will only see your value after you've gone silent. They will only realize the depth of your love when they're met with the absence of it. And even then, don't go back. Don't return to the places that didn't recognize your value the first time. You are not a second chance for someone who misused the first. Because now, your silence is your statement, your growth is your revenge, your happiness is your healing, your peace is your comeback. Let them watch you rise, not because you're trying to impress them, but because you've finally decided to stop trying to prove anything at all. You've outgrown the need to be understood by people who were never committed to understanding you in the first place. You've learned that the love you gave so freely is still yours, and it still matters. Only now, you'll give it to someone who sees it as sacred. This is your comeback era, not loud, not messy, but undeniable, the kind of rise that comes with grace, with boundaries, with purpose, the kind of rise that turns your heartbreak into a rebirth, the kind of rise that speaks for itself. Let's be clear about one thing. When someone takes your love for granted, it isn't always because they're cruel. Sometimes it's because they're broken, and broken people, when left unhealed, don't know how to hold something whole. You came into their life carrying something precious, your heart. You didn't just show up to take. You came with warmth, with energy, with intention. You didn't withhold. You didn't play it safe. You didn't build a wall and peek out from behind it. You walked in and said, "Here, this is me. I'm not perfect, but I'm real." And for a moment maybe they admired it, maybe they even tried to hold it, but eventually their hands started to shake. Not because your love was too heavy, but because it required a kind of strength they hadn't built yet. You see, people who haven't learned to face themselves will always struggle to face someone who offers something authentic. Your presence became a mirror that reflected their lack of depth, their emotional immaturity, their resistance to growth. And when someone isn't ready to grow, they'll push away the very thing that could have expanded them. That's why they rejected it, not because it wasn't good, but because it was too good for where they were in their journey. You may not have realized this while it was happening. Most people don't. Instead, you blamed yourself. You asked all the wrong questions. Was I too much, too emotional, too invested? Should I have held back more? Should I have made them work harder? Was I too available, too giving, too soft? No, you weren't too much. You were just with someone who couldn't hold much. You were a deep soul trying to love someone drowning in their own shallowness. And no matter how hard you tried, they couldn't meet you at the depth you lived in. You thought love was enough. But love given to someone who doesn't know how to receive it becomes a burden to them, an overwhelming pressure they didn't ask for. That doesn't mean your love was wrong, it means it was misplaced. Think of it like this: if you hand someone a gift and they drop it, it doesn't mean the gift had no value. It means they didn't have the hands or the readiness to receive it properly. That's what happened here. You brought love and they brought confusion. You brought presence and they brought distraction. You brought a heart and they brought walls. They didn't see you clearly because they couldn't even see themselves. They were looking at you through the lens of their trauma, their fears, their unresolved wounds. And what does that lens say? If it feels real, it must be a trick. If they love me, they'll eventually hurt me. If someone is too good to be true, they probably are. So instead of leaning in, they pulled back. Instead of holding on, they let go. Instead of choosing to grow with you, they chose to remain where they were, stuck in survival mode. And you were left wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth: you did everything right. You showed up, you loved honestly, you communicated, you cared, you stayed when it got hard, you forgave more than you should have, you hoped for longer than was healthy. You gave someone the benefit of the doubt over and over again, not because you were foolish, but because you believed in love, you believed in connection, you believed that if you just showed them enough of your heart, they'd learn how to meet you halfway. But you can't make someone feel ready by loving them harder. That's the mistake so many beautiful souls make. They think that if they just keep giving, they'll eventually be loved in return. That if they bend a little more, stay a little longer, compromise just a little further, the other person will suddenly see their worth. But love doesn't work like that. Love is not a transaction. It's not something you earn by suffering. It's not something that shows up because you proved yourself through pain. You weren't taken for granted because you were too available. You were taken for granted because they lacked the emotional maturity to recognize what they were being given. In their world, love might have always been conditional. So when they saw unconditional love, they didn't trust it. Maybe they came from chaos and your stability felt unfamiliar. Maybe they came from betrayal and your honesty felt suspicious. Maybe they never learned how to be loved without strings, so when you gave freely, they assumed there was a catch. They didn't reject you. They rejected the version of themselves they'd need to become in order to keep you. That's the most painful truth. You weren't just offering them a relationship. You were offering them a future, a different emotional standard, a deeper level of communication, a better life, but to have that, they would have needed to evolve, to stretch, to heal, to get uncomfortable and confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding, and they weren't ready for that, so they did what unready people do. They self-sabotaged, they picked fights where there were none. They withdrew when you needed them most. They made you feel like your needs were too big, your heart too intense, your love too inconvenient. They confused your strength for pressure. They projected their insecurities onto you and made you feel responsible for their emotional immaturity. But you weren't the problem, you were the catalyst. You brought growth energy into a stagnant soul, and when that happens, the person has two choices: rise with you or remove you. They chose the latter. And while that felt like rejection at the time, it was actually redirection. It was life's way of saying, you can't water someone who doesn't want to grow. Now, here's the part where things start to change. You've cried, you've questioned, you've begged for clarity, and now you're starting to see that their rejection was never really personal. It felt personal because it touched the most tender parts of you, but it was never about your value. It was about their limitations, their fear, their unhealed past, their resistance to becoming someone worthy of your love. That doesn't make them evil. It makes them human, but it also makes you done. Done excusing emotional unavailability as mystery, done mistaking intensity for intimacy, done pouring into people who show up with holes in their cup and blame you for not filling them, because the truth is, your love is a gift, not a transaction, not a negotiation, not a test someone has to pass, a gift. And if someone doesn't know how to receive that gift, you don't chase them trying to force it into their hands. You take it back, not out of bitterness, out of self-respect. You walk away not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself. And in that decision, something beautiful happens. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop exhausting yourself trying to be enough for someone who was never capable of enoughness themselves. You stop shrinking your heart to fit into spaces that don't know how to hold love with reverence. And when that shift happens, you start attracting people who see you clearly, people who get what it means to love deeply, people who don't get scared when things get real, people who have done the work on themselves and are now ready for someone like you, not just in theory but in practice. People who don't need to be convinced of your value because they feel it from day one. So don't regret the love you gave, don't harden, don't shut down, don't become cold just to protect yourself. Your warmth isn't the problem. It's your placement that needs adjustment. From now on, you save your energy for the ones who see your love as a privilege, not a convenience. You give your heart to the people who know how to hold it, not perfectly, but intentionally. You stop over-explaining your goodness to people who were never listening in the first place, and most importantly, you remind yourself every single day that you were never wrong for loving deeply. You were just hoping to be met at a depth that many people are still too afraid to swim in. But that's okay, because now you know better. You've outgrown shallow waters. You're rising, not bitter, just wiser. And the next time you give your love, it'll be to someone who gets it, and who gets you. Let's talk about what it really means to rise after being taken for granted. For many, the first instinct after being hurt is to prove a point, to make them regret, to show them what they lost. You start picturing the glow up, the walk-away moment where they see you thriving and feel the sting of their choices. And let's be honest, that's a very human response. When you've been overlooked, undervalued, or used, there's a part of you that wants them to see what they missed out on. You imagine that one day they'll scroll past a picture of you looking happier than ever, laughing with friends, doing well, looking unbothered, and they'll feel that pang, that ache, that realization, I had someone real and I blew it. That daydream becomes fuel. And for a while it pushes you forward. You hit the gym, you work harder, you cut your hair, you post those photos, you shine on the outside, but here's the truth that no one talks about. That kind of glow up isn't the real rise. Because when your transformation is rooted in revenge, it's still tethered to them. You're still dancing to their rhythm, still giving them space in your mind, still letting their absence dictate your evolution. And that's not power, that's a performance. One that still centers around someone who was never worthy of the role they played in your life. Real rising is quiet. It's not loud and glamorous at first. It doesn't beg for attention. Real rising starts in the dark, behind closed doors, in the moments when no one's watching. It's not about proving anything to anyone else. It's about remembering everything you forgot about yourself. Because that's what pain does. It doesn't just break your heart. It disconnects you from you. In the aftermath of being taken for granted, you don't just lose a relationship. You lose parts of yourself. You lose your confidence, your spark, your trust in your own instincts. You start questioning everything. Was I blind? Was I naive? How did I not see this coming? And as those questions eat away at you, you begin to drift from your truth. You stop recognizing the person in the mirror. You used to laugh without fear of being too much. You used to ask for what you needed without guilt. You used to believe that your love was a gift. But somewhere along the line, all of that got buried beneath someone else's confusion. You stopped showing up fully. You started shrinking, second, guessing, censoring. That's why rising can't be about revenge, because revenge keeps you focused on them, and healing requires you to focus on you. To rise is to return, to come back home to the version of yourself that was never broken, just buried. It's remembering the sound of your own voice after you've silenced yourself for too long. It's learning how to sit with your emotions instead of numbing them. It's realizing that your worth never decreased just because someone failed to see it. You rise when you stop outsourcing your power to the people who hurt you. You rise when you no longer need them to feel sorry or apologize or admit they were wrong in order for you to move on. You stop waiting for closure that was never going to come. You stop needing validation from someone who didn't even know how to validate themselves. That's where the real shift happens, when you choose peace over payback. When you understand that your growth isn't about inspiring regret, it's about reclaiming your joy. You see, they don't need to see your glow up. You need to feel it. Because here's the secret most people never realize. The moment you stop caring about whether they regret losing you is the exact moment you rise into someone they no longer deserve access to. Your rise isn't a show. It's a soul, deep evolution, one that transforms how you move in the world. You start holding boundaries like they're sacred. You start listening to your intuition like it's gospel. You stop tolerating half efforts, mixed signals, emotional crumbs. You no longer entertain people who leave you more confused than clear. You rise when you stop trying to earn love and start expecting it to meet you at your level. This is where healing becomes a revolution. Because instead of becoming cold and guarded, you become selective. You no longer offer your energy freely to those who only know how to take. You love deeply, but with wisdom. You give, but with discernment. You forgive, but without forgetting what it taught you, and this time you don't lose yourself in the process. That's the beauty of rising from real pain. You become unshakable, not because you don't feel anymore, but because you finally honor what you feel. You stop compromising your needs just to keep someone close. You stop dimming your light so others feel more comfortable. You no longer stay in spaces where your heart has to beg for room, because you've learned something sacred now, that being loved by you is not something to take lightly. And the more you realize that, the more you start showing up differently, not desperate, not overcompensating, not trying to force someone to get it. You just be. Fully, unapologetically, completely you. And those who are ready will meet you there, not because you proved yourself, but because you claimed yourself. So if you're rising right now, rise with intention. Let your healing be about you, not about showing them. Not about making them watch, but about you waking up every morning, breathing easier, thinking clearer, and loving yourself with the kind of consistency no one else ever gave you. Let your glow up be in the way you laugh again, in the way you protect your peace, in the way you no longer chase anything that costs your dignity. Let your glow-up be in the way you no longer abandon yourself just to feel chosen. That's not revenge. That's restoration. You rise by becoming someone you admire, someone you trust, someone who no longer performs for love but embodies it, someone who is no longer afraid to walk away when something doesn't align, someone who no longer breaks their own heart just to keep someone else's intact. You rise by making peace with your past without getting stuck in it, and when people come back, and they often do not out of love, but out of nostalgia, loneliness, or ego, you won't need to engage because you'll have outgrown that version of yourself that used to crave their attention. You'll look at them and feel gratitude, not desire. Gratitude that they taught you what you will never again tolerate. Gratitude that they made space for you to finally meet yourself again. That's the kind of rising that lasts, because revenge is fleeting, but reconnection, that changes everything. You didn't lose yourself in love. You found yourself in the wreckage. You stitched yourself back together, not to impress anyone, but to honor what you survived. You chose growth when it would have been easier to stay bitter. You chose peace when you could have clung to pain. You chose to become someone your younger self would be proud of, and that's the most powerful rise of all. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from weakness. It doesn't come from defeat or giving up or being too tired to fight. It comes from finally understanding that not everything, and not everyone, deserves your voice anymore. It's the silence after the last explanation. The one where you stop trying to make someone see your value, stop trying to help them understand your heart, stop trying to prove that your intentions were good. You've tried. You've said the same thing in 5 different ways, hoping just one of them would land. You've poured out your soul, asking them to meet you halfway, just to be met with distance, dismissal, or worse, confusion that made you feel like the problem, and then one day you go quiet, but this silence isn't empty. It's full of clarity, full of unspoken truths, full of all the words you no longer need to say because you finally realized something important. They heard you. They just chose not to care enough to change. So you stop speaking into spaces that don't echo your worth back to you. You stop performing emotional CPR on relationships that flatlined long ago. You stop trying to build bridges where people only brought hammers. This silence, this is the beginning of your power, because here's what they don't expect. They expect the tears, they expect the anger, they expect the calls and messages and emotional spirals. What they don't expect is the stillness. The peace, the cutoff that doesn't come from rage but from resolve. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop pleading, they feel it, that absence. It speaks louder than anything you ever said out loud. Because they were used to access to your energy, your attention, your emotional availability. And when that disappears, when your light is no longer warming them from a distance, they notice. But it's too late. Because now, your silence isn't a punishment, it's protection. It's the boundary they taught you how to build. The silence after walking away is where you begin to heal. Not because they came back begging, but because you stopped needing them to. It's a sacred space where you finally hear your own voice again, the one you muted every time you made excuses for them, the one you ignored every time your gut told you something wasn't right, the one that quietly whispered, "You deserve better," while you kept hoping for more from someone who gave you less. That voice, that's the one you start listening to in the silence, and slowly it becomes louder, more confident, more trusting. It reminds you of who you are without their chaos, without their confusion, without their inconsistencies clouding your mind. You remember that peace isn't boring, it's your birthright. You begin to realize that silence doesn't mean loneliness, it means space. Space to breathe without the heaviness, space to grow without having to shrink, space to reflect without someone twisting your thoughts, space to create a life that isn't about being chosen by them, but about choosing yourself. And this is where the power really builds, because silence is where your standards rise. You stop saying, "Maybe they didn't mean it," and start saying, "Even if they didn't, I'm done tolerating it." You stop begging for the bare minimum and start expecting emotional maturity. You stop confusing inconsistency with passion and start seeing it for what it is. Emotional unavailability dressed in drama. You begin to require clarity, kindness, depth, not as a favor, but as a baseline. In the silence, your tolerance for dysfunction lowers and your devotion to peace increases. You stop being addicted to the highs and lows of someone else's emotional roller coaster and start craving the steadiness that comes from a life where your heart is safe, even with yourself. You rise quietly, slowly, not in a way that begs for attention, but in a way that's unshakable. Your friends notice it before you do. You speak with more certainty. You stop reacting to things that used to unravel you. You smile differently, not as a cover-up, but as a reflection of actual joy. You stop checking your phone every 2 minutes. You stop wondering if they'll come back. And even if they do, you already know the answer, no. Because the silence showed you what chaos never could. That life doesn't have to be earned through suffering. That love doesn't have to be chased. That you don't have to bleed emotionally just to prove that your love is real. It already is, and now you know it. You stop trying to get closure through conversation. You realize closure comes from within. It comes when you stop arguing with the past and start honoring the lessons. It comes when you stop revisiting chapters that no longer reflect who you are. It comes when you say to yourself with full conviction, I'm done handing out pieces of myself to people who wouldn't even offer me clarity. There's strength in walking away, but there's power in staying silent after. Because in the silence you start rebuilding, intentionally. You become more selective with your energy. You're no longer accessible to people who drain you. You're no longer seduced by potential. You want action, effort, reciprocity. You want love that speaks your language, not one you have to translate, decode, or rescue. You start falling back in love with your solitude. You do things that once felt foreign. You take yourself out. You journal without judgment. You cry without shame. You smile in the mirror, not because everything is perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, you're proud of yourself. Proud that you didn't go back, proud that you didn't call, proud that you finally chose yourself over your history with someone else, proud that you honored your own boundaries even when it hurt. This is the kind of power that scares people. The kind that doesn't need to be loud to be felt. The kind that doesn't chase love, it attracts it. Because people can sense when someone has done the inner work, when someone has faced their pain and come out cleaner, clearer, quieter, but stronger. You no longer need to scream your worth. You walk in it. You wear it. It's in the way you carry yourself, the way you say no, the way you don't explain your standards to people who never intended to meet them. And maybe somewhere down the line they'll notice, they'll reach out, they'll test the waters, but by then you've changed, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. You no longer crave what once made you sick. You no longer call emotional inconsistency chemistry. You no longer think that love is about holding on, it's about choosing wisely, and now you choose differently, because the silence taught you that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. It taught you that peace doesn't come when they come back. It comes when you no longer care if they do. It taught you that healing isn't linear, but it's always worth it. The silence after walking away is where your roots grow deep. It's where you plant the seeds for the life you actually deserve, not the one you were settling for, not the one you were convincing yourself was enough, but the one where you're fully seen, fully heard, fully held. You come out of the silence softer in some ways, harder in others. You're not jaded, you're just aware. You don't hate love. You just know it's not always what people call it. You don't chase anymore, not because you're cold, but because you finally understand that the right love won't make you abandon yourself. This is your rise, not a moment of revenge, not a loud exit, but a quiet revolution that started the day you said nothing at all, and walked away anyway. There's a moment, after the heartbreak, after the silence, after the sleepless nights, when you begin to wonder who you were before you started trying so hard to be loved. It hits you softly at first, maybe while brushing your hair. Maybe while sitting alone in your car or scrolling through old pictures. You look at yourself and think, where did I go? Not just the smile, not just the laughter, but the essence of who you were before all the bending, before all the compromising, before you spent every ounce of your energy trying to be enough for someone who never really saw you. That version of you didn't disappear. She was buried, he was buried, beneath layers of guilt, of anxiety, of silent resentment. Beneath nights where you stayed quiet to keep the peace. Beneath mornings where you woke up wondering how much more of yourself you'd have to lose just to hold onto a relationship that was never holding you back. And the truth is, you weren't wrong for trying. That's the painful part. You gave your best, you gave your all. You believed in love, in hope, in healing. You believed that if you just gave a little more, held on a little tighter, loved a little louder, they'd finally see you. They'd wake up and realize you were everything they needed. But that's the myth you outgrow when you rise. You stop believing that your worth is something you have to prove. You stop thinking that love needs to be earned through sacrifice or struggle or suffering. You stop contorting yourself into a shape that fits someone else's comfort while losing your own identity in the process. Because here's what no one told you, the version of you that lit up a room before the pain. They're still there, the one who used to laugh with their whole chest, the one who used to dream without doubting, the one who knew their worth before the world told them they had to lower their voice to be accepted. That person didn't die, they just got quiet, they got tired, they retreated into survival mode. Survival will make you forget who you are. It will teach you how to smile when you're hurting, how to pretend you're okay while you're breaking, how to act unbothered when every part of you is screaming. You become an expert at holding it together while falling apart inside. You show up for others while secretly begging for someone, anyone, to show up for you the way you show up for them. And in the process, you start to believe a dangerous lie that your worth is tied to your usefulness, that love is conditional, that if you're not perfect, you're replaceable, that being too much is a reason for people to walk away. So you shrink. You stop asking for what you need. You stop expressing how you feel. You stop dreaming out loud. You tell yourself, maybe if I just stay small, they'll stay. Maybe if I stop complaining, they'll come around. Maybe if I carry both of our emotional loads, one day they'll wake up and realize I was the one all along. But that's not love, that's performance. You don't rise by performing anymore, you rise by returning. Returning to the version of you that didn't question their worth every time someone else failed to show up. Returning to the part of you that knew how to say no without guilt. Returning to the soul inside you that was born worthy, not because of what you could give or how much you could tolerate, but because you exist. You rise by digging through the wreckage of who you tried to become for them, and rediscovering who you've always been. Not the version that was scared of being abandoned, not the version that tolerated confusion and called it love, not the version that accepted crumbs and called it connection, but the version of you that was brave enough to love before the world told you to be afraid of your own depth. You rise when you realize you were never too much, you were just too real for people still hiding from themselves, and in that realization you begin to shed everything that was never truly yours, the fear, the guilt, the idea that your love needs to be earned through pain. You shed the masks, the roles, the watered-down versions of yourself that you created just to keep the peace. Because peace built on your silence isn't peace, it's suppression. You stop suppressing who you are just to stay in places you've outgrown. You stop walking on eggshells just to avoid conflict. You stop begging for breadcrumbs when you were always meant to feast on the fullness of love. And the best part, you start to feel yourself again. Your laugh gets louder, your thoughts get clearer, you speak up sooner, you protect your energy more fiercely, you trust your instincts, you set boundaries, not as punishment but as self-respect. You remember what it feels like to be in love with your own life. It's not a sudden moment. It's not a big dramatic shift. It's small things. It's waking up one morning and realizing you didn't think about them today. It's driving past the place that used to trigger memories and feeling nothing but peace. It's hearing a song that once made you cry and now just makes you feel gratitude for how far you've come. It's sitting alone on a Friday night and feeling whole, not hollow. You realize that rising isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more of who you always were. You were never broken. You were exhausted from giving to the wrong people. You were never unlovable. You were loving people who hadn't yet learned how to love themselves. You were never too sensitive. You just refused to grow numb in a world that rewards apathy, and that is your strength. You start building again, but this time for you. You stop waiting for someone to choose you and choose yourself in every decision, every boundary, every relationship. You stop apologizing for your standards. You stop explaining your emotional depth to people who are only fluent in surface level connection. You start seeing yourself the way you wished others had. You become the love you were hoping someone else would finally give you. You give it to your body by resting instead of punishing. You give it to your mind by feeding it truth instead of fear. You give it to your heart by forgiving yourself for staying too long, by loving yourself for leaving when you did, and by promising yourself that next time you'll never abandon you again. And when people see you now, they'll think, wow, you've changed. But the truth is, you didn't change, you just returned, you peeled back the layers, you dug beneath the performance, you stopped proving, pleasing, and performing, and you remembered who you are without the heartbreak. You remembered what you sound like without all the noise. You remembered that the best version of you was never missing, just silenced, and now you're done being quiet because you're rising, not with fire. With truth, not with revenge, with wholeness, not for them, for you. The best version of you doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't settle, it doesn't disappear when love gets hard, it shows up, it speaks clearly, it loves fully, it walks away when it's no longer being met, and it never ever forgets its value again. You are not rebuilding yourself from scratch, you are uncovering what's always been there, a heart that knows how to love without losing itself. A soul that knows its worth without needing someone else to confirm it. A person who is no longer afraid of standing alone, because now you know you were never incomplete to begin with. Let them watch you rise. But more importantly, watch yourself rise. Witness the quiet power of your return. Celebrate every moment where you choose peace over performance. Smile every time you say yes to your own healing, and remember this, they didn't take the best of you. They just paused your connection to it. Now you're back, now you're rising, and this time you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't rise to be seen. You rise because staying where you were is no longer an option. You rise because your soul outgrew the silence, the confusion, the half-love. You rise not to inspire regret in others, but to give yourself the life you were always worthy of. Let them watch if they must. Let them scroll, let them hear about your glow up, let them feel the shift, but your story now is no longer about them, it's about you, you who stayed soft in a hard world, you who kept loving even after being left empty, you who finally realized that walking away wasn't giving up, it was giving yourself back. You never needed revenge, you needed release, you never needed closure, you needed clarity, you never needed their recognition. You needed to remember your own. They took your love for granted. That was their loss. But you rise, quiet, certain, whole, and that's the version of you the world is about to meet.